Okay, thank you very much. So next, we have another presentation from Miss Dhliwayo. Yeah, please give him another round of applause. Okay, for the next presentation, from Miss Dhliwayo Yemurai, Mr. Mathura Tafara Irvin, and Miss Musariri Helen Diasha. They will present about water management plan for Wedja rural settlements in Zimbabwe. Please welcome her with a big round of applause.
A pleasant afternoon to you all. I'm Yemurai, and I'll be presenting on a water management plan for Wedza rural settlement in Zimbabwe. And these will be my contents of my presentation. Now, Zimbabwe is located in the southern region of Africa, having a total population of 14 million people, and as well having an area of 163,200 squares. Its neighbors are Namibia, Zambia, South Africa, Botswana, and Mozambique. Our target area, being Wedza, as identified from our topic, is located 127 kilometers away from the capital, having a total population of 70,968 people, receiving an annual rainfall of 786.4 millimeters per year. Now, just to give you a background of why we chose this study, Zimbabwe is an agrarian society. That is to say, it depends on agricultural production. Most of our economic activities are based on the agricultural sector activity. Now, Wedza, the target area we have chosen, was identified to be the most active area to produce agriculture production in our country. Now, time went on, when there was an extreme underperformance of the agricultural sector. It began to affect our economic activities. Moreover, our focus is still Wedza. It being the major active role in agricultural production, it was noted as well to be declining in produce. The government tried to devise plans with insignificant changes to the agricultural sector's performance. Now we began to resort on importation, which I all know and understand is not a good thing. As you can see, we fell from 14,000 tons of produce to 1,000 tons of produce within just 10 years. As if that's enough, we started to import. Now, this study shows us that if we do not devise a solution to at least increase our agricultural production, our imports are actually going to surpass our agricultural production, which is not a good sight. Underperformance of the agricultural sector as well identified a total number of 250,000 people being unemployed within just 5 years, which is definitely not a good sign to our society at large. Now, Mapfumo took up a study in order to understand what is happening, and the major cause was climate change. I think we all both agree that climate change is a global concern, as it is included even in the Sustainable Development Goals to try and counterattack these negative effects being introduced by this. Now, the major impact that the agricultural sector has set on our country is food insecurity. This is a study that was taken within just a year of how we are progressing in terms of our food security levels. We managed to move from a stressed position to a crisis position in just 1 year. Zim States managed to support that. In that 1 year, we managed to increase by a percentage of 164% of food insecurity. Now, this was the major concern when we decided to take up this project so as to devise plans to counterattack the climatic change effects that are having a negative impact on our agricultural sector. These are some of the images. My side has got the good produce that we had before. But look at what is happening. Climate change is actually drying up the crops in the fields before we even harvest anything. It's a serious case, but let me just show you with just a video how intense this problem is.
Agriculture is the backbone of Zimbabwe's economy and occupies a pivotal position in the development of the country. Approximately 80% of the population is dependent on agriculture for their livelihood. In 1991, agriculture contributed 20% of the GDP, about one-third coming from the subsistence farmers on communal lands, and employed 67% of the labor force. Internationally, Zimbabwe was considered the breadbasket of Africa. Beginning the year 2000, there's been a sharp decline in agricultural productivity, resulting in shortage of food and reduced income, especially to smallholder farmers in Zimbabwe. The decline is largely attributed to a combination of factors that include unreliable rainfall, low and unattractive producer prices, declining investment in agriculture, poor extension support, poorly developed input supply markets, shortages and high prices of key inputs, declining soil fertility, insecure land tenure, lack of proper land and crop management skills, and the implementation of the controversial land redistribution program by the Zimbabwe government. Donors and relief agencies have traditionally responded by providing mass food aid, seed and fertilizers, agricultural inputs to establish farmers' cropping enterprises. The disadvantages of these measures is that they address the short-term food requirements, ignoring the underlying constraints.
Now, clearly, it's a very major concern to us, and we have to come up with plans in order to set this up. It's a privilege to be part of the PSPS society that is teaching us the Sema Undong. First of all, Korea itself was in such a position whereby there was low agricultural production. But guess what? They managed to raise their grain self-sufficiency percentage from 0 to over 100 in a space of 30 years. Now imagine if we implement the tool that they took up and put it in our country. I'm sure it would make a big difference. Now Sema Undong takes care of 3 main spheres, that is diligence, self-help, and cooperation, which has managed to make Korea devise a technique in order to manage and raise their agricultural production in their community. Sema Undong's effectiveness is identified by this quotation by Ban Ki-moon, who says Sema Undong shares the ultimate targets of the SDGs. Leaders have pledged to create a life of dignity for all people and promised to leave no one behind, including families in the rural areas. Now, if Sema Undong is being identified to be an effective tool for the SDGs, imagine. So, the vision that we have for this plan is to improve livelihoods of the rural community of Wedza through technological advancement and increase in the agricultural production. Our mission is to discover and implement a workable and appropriate water management tool for the community of Wedza. We've got 4 major objectives, being identification of a water management tool, the other one being introduction of a feasible water management tool to the community, mindset change, as well as introduction of alternatives other than the agricultural activities to sustain living in the community at large. Our project will take a span of 8 years, having the budget that has been allocated before that will be explained later. Now, our project is guided by 3 frameworks: the Bounce Project Cycle, SWOT Analysis, and Logic Framework. Now, these are just to show you that we are dealing with a real problem and not just assumptions. The Bounce Project accepts the fact that every project follows a cycle of 7 stages, being identification, preparation, appraisal, negotiation, implementation, supervision, and evaluation. The logic framework, however, identifies that there should be feedback, a relationship between inputs and output. That is to say, the output of another stage is an input to another stage. The SWOT analysis makes us identify the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, as well as the threats that are associated with the project that you're taking care of. And we managed to do our own SWOT analysis, and we found that for our strengths, there's going to be employment creation as well as poverty alleviation. Homogeneous society suitable for SMU. the Semal Undong. Semal Undong technique has not just been kept to Korea, but it has managed to go to other countries in Africa. Ethiopia, where there's now cattle rearing, improved with significant good results. Uganda, farmers have been empowered to increase their income in just a short span, and we also want that. It's going to be a major opportunity for us, as we also feel that we are missing such privileges, and we need them as well to come to our country. Another opportunity is the improvement of technology in our country. Our weaknesses, however, are the lack of technological equipment, as well as the technology knowledge on the equipment that we're going to introduce for the success of this plan. The last threat, however, which is also a weakness, are the economic hardships that are being faced in our country. The present investments as well are actually suffocating to the present economic hardships that are in our country, and that too as well pose the same threat to us. Now, I identified that Korea was an inspiration to this. Now, Korea was identified to have water supply to them was actually a problem to them. They devised a plan in order to counterattack this, and that's why they came up with the Groundwater Management Agency. This agency just focused alone on the water supply itself, because they knew that climate change has got a negative effect on water supply. Now, it had 4 major institutions. The first one, Korean Institute of Geoscience and Minerals Resource, GICAM, focused on the research on the climate changes that are going to occur. It focused on the research on the techniques that would be necessary in order to counterattack those negative climatic effects that they found out. The next institution was Korean Rural Community Cooperation, KRC, that focused on preliminary feasibility tests, performance assessment, as well as designing of an effective tool that could be used for water management in the country of Korea. The third one, Korea Water Resource Cooperation, K-Water, that focused on sustainable management of the water tool that has been put. That is to say, evaluation, monitoring, repairs, just to make sure that the tool that they've implemented is very effective. And the last one is the Integrated Groundwater Information Service, GIMS, that supports and distributes the information regarding regulations and policies to the nation and the local government. That is to say, data storage as well as data dissemination of what they've collected. Now, this, however, managed to make us come up with a process that we identified will be able to motivate our objectives. And we should note that our objectives follow a button-stick exchange. That is to say, the success of the first objective will mark the start of the second objective. It's a process that we are going to take for one objective to the other. The first objective is to identify a water management tool. That is to say, we are going to introduce a water management institution. This institution, however, is going to be responsible for research on the climate threats that might be faced later on as we go on for the other years, as well as this constitution will be responsible for the implementation, monitoring, evaluation of the techniques that they are going to come up with. In us managing this, we move over to the second objective, that is to make the activity a community-driven project. Now, we are going to focus on education. We are going to educate the community of Wedza on the threats that are there at present and what could come in the future. Now, for us in our country, protocol is very important. You just don't come to a community and suggest solutions without approaching the main leaders. We are first going to go to the traditional leaders, tell them what is happening, explain to them every single detail of what they are expected to face if no solution is found. Now, if we have gained the favor of the leaders, I'm sure the communities, we can draw them in. It's just a matter of approaching them together with our leaders with the technique that has been identified by the management institution, thereby also enlightening them about the Semal spirit, as well as trying to come up with a Semal Education Center, which leads us to the third objective, implementation. Now, we are now implementing the tool or the solutions that we have come up with. Implementation is going to involve the community. But first of all, we are going to conduct intensive lobbying and advocacy. That is to approach all organizations that would want to be involved in this remarkable movement to gain support, to gain funds, as well as to reach out to communities that are unaware of this movement that we would intend to bring to Wedza and improve the agricultural production. In that, we are able to now identify our inputs and thus take into motion the tool that we have actually appreciated to be the best tool for us to improve agriculture production. Now we have finished the 3 stages, and now the final stage in actually managing to increase production in the agricultural sector is to actually introduce an alternative solution. It is general knowledge that climate change is a global concern. We do not know the weather conditions we'll face next year. What we faced last time is not what we'll face this time. So we don't solemnly need to depend on the agrarian society in order to sustain our living. We need to come up with alternatives that do not depend on climate change so as to be able to sustain living within our communities. Now, all of these activities are going to be supported by this budget, and our budget should be realized that we use the United States currency, and the total is $113,000. Now, upon the success of this project, we are going to have several results. As we mentioned, that the constitution that we introduce will come up with solutions depending on the risks that they have identified from the climate change that is going to come. They are going to come up with the solutions as identified from the images. There are several, but we'll pick one that is conducive for them. As well as diffusion of the technique worldwide will be an expected result, because we do not want that technique to just stay in Wedza, but the nationwide. As well, there will be acceptance of the remedies suggested. If the community does not accept these remedies, then I'm sure we'd have done nothing. In conclusion, we thank the PSPS Society for enlightening us on what Korea has done to be where they are. And we feel motivated to bring such techniques back home, because for this project, the success is going to improve the socio-economic activities. That is, that our trade will come back to normal, our employment will be back to normal by the success of this project, as well as to retain the position of being the breadbasket of Africa. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the presentation. You look like you are more getting interested in these topics. In the first session, we more talk about women empowerment, but second session, we have a variety of presentation and interesting topics. Again, thank you very much. Any question from floor? Oh, wow. Okay, I will accept only 3 questions. Do we? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. How many questions I can propose? It is true.
Yeah, 1, please.
What? Seriously? Oh my God. Before I ask you a question, I need to make sure a couple of things. Wedza is a city, right?
Yes, Wedza is the... Yes.
First question. Wedza is surrounded by 6 rivers, right? And it become become a main source of water for the city. And what exactly the problem this city face in a water issue, first. And the second, you mentioned about management tools, water management tools. I don't understand. Maybe you can explain us about what the management tools you envision, because I don't know whether your country, Zimbabwe, implement IWRIM or not, but according to concept of IWRIM, Integrated Water Resource Management, there are 3 tools in water management. So please explain about. And last question, management has something to do with policy, and you mentioned about institution. You want to establish some institution, and if I'm not mistaken, you want to establish at least the same institution as in Korea. There are 4 institutions, and you want to establish all of them. Do you have in Zimbabwe? Do you have law or act on water resource that you talk about the water development and also the institution. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. Just to answer the first question, you identified that we've got rivers that surround the Wedza community. Yes, they are there, and they are actually being used. But now my major concern, or the major concern of this, our research, is that climate change has actually affected the levels of water in the Wedza community. Yes, the rivers are there, and there are a lot of agricultural activities, as we identified, that is the powerhouse of our agricultural production, which means there are a lot of activities. Now, with the climate changes in our country, it's lowering the water levels. Now, we want to come up with something that is effective, that can actually counterattack that. This Korean Groundwater Institute manipulated a lot of techniques, but we can't solemnly depend on the rivers alone. We need something that is tangible, that will come up from this institution, that will be able to sustain the agricultural sector. The policies that have been implemented in our country, yes, the policies are there. As we identified that the government also tried to get involved to come up with policies that would actually manage the water in our country. But I would want you to accept the fact that in our country we really don't have that committee that actually specifies on water management. It's still lacking. So we would want to introduce something like that in order for it to be effective. Moreover, policies have been introduced a lot. But as we mentioned, that they are bringing insignificant change to the water management in our country. As well, the production is not increasing, it's still declining with more policies. So the policies are there, but we just need something in order to sustain our living. That's why we came up with an institute that will be responsible for the research and the evaluation of the techniques that they will come up in order to raise up production through water management.
Sorry. Please understand, don't try to make an argument. Just a simple question, okay? And comment. We have a time limitation. Please understand.
I forgot your name, sorry. Thank you for your confidence on the presentation. I have a sample question. If you can give us, you mentioned many problems about the food insecurity in Zimbabwe. I have read something about land reform in Zimbabwe, that it does not contribute to the food insecurity in Zimbabwe. Can you give us some more information about that? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your question. Yes, the land reform was introduced in our country, and I will be happy to inform you that it did not have a major impact on our food insecurity levels. The land reform was introduced. There were some periods that there were noted droughts in between, but Zimbabwe managed to rise up from those droughts even after the implementation of the land reform. Now, what we have identified that whether the land reform was there or whether it was not there, there is still a decline in the agricultural production, which is also having a negative effect on the food insecurity levels. Now, I will be proud to tell you that the land reform didn't do much effect on the food insecurity. It's just basically the output that has been troubling us. With the land reform, there were actually times where there were droughts, but we managed to resurrect from them. But now it seems like we are actually getting to a crisis, as you saw from the stages. If you can actually move from a serious case to a crisis within just a year, which means it is a major concern that is now coming up. And that's the one that we identified to be the climate change that is happening globally. It's not just affecting our country alone, but it's affecting globally as well.
Okay, let's stop here. Thank you very much. Thank you for the passionate presentation. Okay, now we will have another presentation, but before moving on to the next, let me introduce another professor here. We have one more professor, Professor Lee Yang-soo.